Fox 10's John Hook.
Thanks for joining us on Newsmaker Sunday. Happy to have Arizona Attorney General Mark Brnovich with us today on Newsmaker Sunday. A whole host of topics we've got to get to. Good to see you again.
Great seeing you, John.
On the job now for, what, a year?
A year, yes.
How does it feel?
Great. Blessed. Every day is just such a blessing. I feel like I can affect people's lives in a very positive manner and just a lot of fun.
Is it what you expected?
It is. I mean, you may recall, I actually worked as an assistant AG,
right.
And one of the things I did when I first got there, I brought all the divisions together to emphasize our job. We count success not in wins or losses, but has justice been done. We're the people's lawyers, and you're in a room full of all lawyers and people, and I actually mentioned, I said, I remember being an assistant AG here 10, 12 years ago, sitting in the back of the room going, oh my gosh, is this meeting over? And now, so there's hope for all the people
so
sitting
the meetings are short in your office?
Yes, exactly.
That's
so
smart.
There's hope for all the people that are in the back row. Yes.
Okay, you talk about justice served. Let's talk about that for a minute. The push this week by Arizona Governor Doug Ducey announcing a partnership with members of the congressional delegation to try to pull out of the Ninth Circuit, get our own circuit or divide up the Ninth Circuit. What's the reason for this?
Well, this is something that's not new or novel. This is something we've been talking about literally for 2-3 decades. Folks like Senator Kyle has been a big proponent of this even when he was in the U.S. Senate. And I know that just Senator Flake is also a proponent of it.
Mm-hmm.
Bottom line is this.
These are some of the states. We don't see Alaska on there, but Alaska's part of this too. Right?
Bottom line is this, John, is that sometimes in the legal community we jokingly refer to the Ninth Circuit as the Ninth Circus. It's big, it's unruly, it's the most overturned circuit. There's so many judges on the Ninth Circuit. When you want an en banc or the entire court to hear a case, like in other circuits, you might have all 11 judges hear the case. But there's so many judges on the Ninth Circuit, they can't do that. So they have to draw lots to determine. So
you usually get 3.
Right. And so there's a real randomness. There's some, the only consistent thing is you're going to get very left-wing or liberal decisions out of the Ninth Circuit. And so there's been a lot of frustration. And so states like, Nevada, Idaho, there's always been a lot of talk, a lot of thought that, well, let's let California, Oregon, and Washington, maybe Hawaii have their own, circuit, and then we could have our own circuit with some of the mountain states.
Well, and the argument against this is that it's almost like shopping for an opinion that you want. Try to get an appellate court that would be more reflective of Arizona, but some people say that's too political. This is the same kind of stuff that people criticized Obama for, kind of making his own rules.
Well, I guess I would flip that around a little bit, John, because why is it that in the Ninth Circuit we might get one ruling on immigration, but in the Fifth Circuit, where we know that case is at the U.S. Supreme Court now, we're getting an entirely different ruling, and that's partly because those judges are reflective of the states and the jurisdiction they serve. So I would submit to you that when you talk about San Francisco or those values of California, they are different. They are different than Arizona, Oregon. I mean, they are. They're more liberal. They're more left-leaning states, and that's good for them. But, we were supposed to have these 50 laboratories of democracy, as Justice Brnovich said, and we should, I think, have communities of interest or states of interest when it comes to our appellate courts. They should reflect the values of those states and those people.
As states, though, change demographically and politically, then you could be in for a hodgepodge of states trying to change whatever circuit they're in based on conditions on the ground at any one time. Does that create chaos potentially?
I don't. I mean, because this isn't something that we're talking about like a census or congressional districts where you're going to change every 10 years. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is you have a district where you have a lot of everyone admits, left, right admits, caseload is through the roof, the number of cases they hear, the backlog is through the roof, the time it takes to get decisions is through the roof. There are practical and logistical reasons why the Ninth Circuit should be broken up. And once you reach that conclusion that it should be broken up, the next question I think becomes, well, how do you break it up? And I think that what you should do is have those states that kind of have similar, water issues like us, Nevada, mountain states, and then let the other, like maybe coastal states that have those issues be in the
Congress would have to do this.
Yes.
And that's not an easy process, right?
It's not, because a lot of people have their own self-interest. But as I said, this isn't something that's new or novel. I mean, Senator Kyle, when he was in the Senate, was working with Senator Feinstein on this very issue years ago. So this is something that every once in a while you'll hear percolate up, people talk about, and hopefully this time with Senator Flake, Senator McCain there, Congressman Matt Salmon, they're really working it, that we'll get some push this time. Okay,
and even though we've been with the Ninth Circuit since statehood, you don't think that this is a little heavy-handed? You think it's a fair thing to do?
I don't think heavy-handed is the right word. As I said, if you look at the caseload, the amount of cases and what the delay in getting decisions, opinions out, I don't think it's unreasonable to have a split in the circuit. And once you accept that notion, I think looking at how you split it then becomes, well, you know, how are you going to divide those lines? And I think there's a natural division between, you know, Hawaii, California, Oregon, Washington. They kind of fit nicely together.
Let me ask you about this driver's license for Dreamers. You said you wanted to delay any action on this because Supreme Court's taking it up to hear a challenge to President Obama's authority on DACA and all of that. That once that's decided, then it would affect this idea that people could have a driver's license if they're here. It could affect it.
Yeah, and John, I guess I would say a couple things. One is when you call Dreamers and driver's license, I mean, I'm a dreamer, you're a dreamer. I mean, when my family immigrated here from, you know, the Eastern Europe, I mean, they had a dream, the American dream, and so we're all dreamers here in America. And but we're also, what made this country great is the rule of law, and that's what separates us from, you know, former communist countries or third world dictators, is the law and the rules mean something. And so I've always maintained that these cases involving driver's license or even in-state tuition, they're not about the policy matters, they're about the law. And so when Arizona voters, for example, approved by 70% that they didn't want folks in the country that came in illegally to have in-state tuition, that was a decision of the voters. And if people don't like that, you change the legislature, you change the governor, you know, you go back to the ballot. Same thing with the driver's license. I believe very strongly you can argue the merits, whether we should or shouldn't allow them, but ultimately I think that's a decision for Arizonans to decide. And the Obama administration took the position in the Fifth Circuit, in the case that's now at the U.S. Supreme Court, that it was up to states. They had the discretion whether they wanted to give licenses or not. But here in the Ninth Circuit in Arizona, they take the positions that we have to. So there's a bunch of hypocrisy and politics with this issue, which I'd like us to take a step back and say, what's the law require? What does the Constitution require?
Would you agree or disagree that if you've got a driver's license in this country, you pretty much have your keys to the kingdom?
You know, it's funny, there's all sorts of policy.
Voting, everything.
I think that you're making a legitimate point, and there's all sorts of policy arguments as to the consequences of either not giving or giving driver's licenses to people. I think there's arguments that you can make on both sides. But ultimately, to me, the fundamental question is, does Arizona get to make that decision, or can the president, acting unilaterally, impose his will, even bypassing Congress, on us?
And you believe in the former. It should be the state's decision.
I ultimately believe it should be the state's decision. And you know, the president's not a king, and you don't have to believe me. That's what President Obama himself said when he was saying he didn't have this authority. So
I got to ask you about where we are right now with the death penalty in Arizona. We've got this big hang-up on the drugs that are used for the lethal injection. Where are we right now? Because you've said you're going to push to get these drugs in here and do this.
Right. Well,
we've not had an execution for how long now?
Yeah, since the Wood execution. And
that's going back, what, 2 years?
A couple of years, yeah. And I mean, ultimately, I think that justice delayed is justice denied. And so often we focus on, you know, the killers, and they have all these appeals, and we don't focus enough on these victims and what they've gone through, what their families have gone through. And, you know, ultimately what I think's happening, what we've seen, is opponents of the death penalty create all these legal obstacles, create all these time delays, and then they go into the court and they say, oh, it's taking too long. Or they go to the public and say, oh, it's taking too long, it's too costly. But they're the ones that have created these delays.
But in this case, the drug companies have been the ones reluctant to let their drugs be used in this kind of exercise.
And that's because of the pressure that's been put on by the opponents of the death penalty. And that's why I think ultimately, once again, if we want to be intellectually honest with this, then maybe we need to look at other alternatives to execution.
Okay, now we're talking. I wanted to ask you about this. Why could we not, in a humane way, carry out a death in the old gas chamber by either depleting oxygen out of the gas chamber or introducing, I don't know, carbon dioxide, put that in there, let somebody go to sleep as they would in an airplane crisis like Payne Stewart, where the oxygen hypoxia, the oxygen goes out, you fall asleep, and you die. Why can't we come up with some other way without even having drugs to do this?
You know, I think you're really touching on something, John, because as we were going through this process, our office, and I guess to go back to answer your question, it's in litigation right now. There's litigation over, you know, where the state did or didn't, you know, acquire drugs and how they acquired them. The Department of Corrections.
I would argue, why can't we take drugs completely out of the equation?
And that's, I think that you raise a very legitimate issue, because it does seem to me that if Jack Kevorkian could figure out a way to kill people quickly and painlessly, or in states or countries that have euthanasia, they can do it. We should be able to figure it out. And ultimately, I think this is because there's an intellectual dishonesty of opponents of the death penalty. And so whatever reason or whatever you come up with, they're going to try to find a way to stop it. And that's what they should say. They should say that's what they're trying to do. We as a society, we don't put people to death because we want to or we get some sort of bloodlust or joy out of it. We do it because we think we have to, that this is what justice demands, this is what deterrence demands, this is what our society is demanding. And so when we do it, we don't want to inflict unnecessary suffering. We don't want to be cruel. You know, we don't want to do anything that gets beyond that constitutional line. And so that's why we should be figuring out a way. And there
is that being discussed, that option?
I will tell you, I think there are people that are looking at this issue seriously, and I've heard people talk about it, and I've even said that, well, maybe we need to go back to a firing squad. It's quick, it's effective, it's messy, it's bloody, but if people are truly worried about how long it's taking people to die or how quickly we can put people to death, if we as a society are going to have the death penalty, then we should figure out the quickest and most efficient way to do it.
My issue with the death penalty has always been that it's the ultimate punishment, yet it's done in a cloak of secrecy, in the dark of night, usually after midnight, where no one sees it. So the deterrent effect is not really there because the public, they know somebody was put to death, but they don't see it. I've witnessed executions. I've seen what it's all about, but the public hasn't. And I think we've got this backwards. If we're going to talk about a deterrent, I think there should be widespread coverage of it.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, interesting debate. When it comes to deterrence, there's always the question. There's been, you know, all sorts of studies done about general deterrent, but I do know this: it's a specific deterrent. When there was people like, remember Bonsai Vickers that was here on death row, and then actually killed more people and he carved his name as the toothbrush into the back of someone. I mean, we know that he'll never be able to kill again. When you think about those killers that escaped in New York this last summer, they were in prison for murder, for homicide.
For life.
But they were life. If we had had a death penalty, they'd have never gotten out, and as a society, those communities wouldn't have been threatened, and they wouldn't have had to go through all that, you know, emotional distress and the money to track them down.
However, the length of the appeals, they might have still gotten out before they ever would have seen the death penalty.
And that's a different question. And I think that, you know, when President McKinley was assassinated, his killer was tried, convicted, and executed within a year. Now, I'm not saying we have to be that fast, but I point that out to show.
But 20 years is too long.
But there's got to be somewhere on the spectrum where we can do this quicker and more effectively, because right now what we see is there's such a focus on these defendants and their rights that we're not focusing enough on the victims and their family that never had a chance. They didn't get 20 years. And I think ultimately, John, the irony is these people that worry about it taking too long, or, you know, Woods taking an hour to die, his lawyers fought for years to delay that execution for years, and now they're worried about that last hour.
Let me go to the former corporation commissioner, Susan Bitter-Smith. This is tape number 3. How do I tidily put this together? She was basically consulting with the very people she's regulating. That was essentially the charge. This was brought to your attention first, right? By a complaint from someone?
That's correct.
They brought it to you and said, this doesn't seem kosher. When you read it, did you have any idea that this was going on?
No, until the complaint really came forward. I will be frank with you. As you know, I'm the former federal and state prosecutor, and I'm not in the business of trying to make criminals out of otherwise law-abiding people, or someone's case someone's
it's like
a lawbreaker.
No one knew about this.
But this was one of those instances where we're not talking about a gray area or skating close to a line. I mean, she was making $150,000 as her side job working for entities that had provided bundling services that were regulated by the corporation.
Phone companies, stuff that was in her purview.
Right, exactly. And so there was this whole discussion, or, you know, her side would say, oh, well, you know, you're talking about the difference between parents and subsidiaries, and, you know, I think we all know that when the subsidiary is making money, that means the parent is making money,
so
the parent
it was
company.
too close to the line or over the line in your view. So then what did you do?
Well, we moved forward. We got a great legal team, and we filed the motion directly in the state Supreme Court. We thought this was a very serious issue, that we couldn't wait, especially because the Corporation Commission had pending matters before it. So we filed the motion pleadings directly with the state Supreme Court, asking that she be removed from office because she was ineligible to serve.
Was there any, on that matter, I mean, you were criticized, right, for not trying to go after criminal charges right off the bat. Is that correct?
I guess you did, but I didn't.
No?
No,
Okay.
no.
Okay.
I don't know. People, sometimes justice doesn't move as fast as people like, but ultimately our goal is justice. Is what does the law say? What does it require? And that's where we go.
So you wanted to push to get a remedy on that issue of whether she should be on that commission or not.
Correct.
That
I
was
thought
a
that was
better
important.
plan than going criminally after her.
I was, and as you know, John, there's a different burden of proof in criminal cases. It's beyond a reasonable doubt versus preponderance of evidence. The facts, I thought clearly, at least in my point of view, the facts were clear that she had a conflict of interest and she was ineligible to serve. When it comes to criminal, there's a different analysis, different standard of proof. And as I have never been, even when I was a line-level prosecutor, I've never been one of these people. I understand the power of an indictment, what it does to someone. I don't ever believe, I tell her, we don't throw stuff against the wall and seize with sticks. I mean, because you're talking about people's life, liberty, their property, their reputation. So we're not going to file criminal charges unless we believe we have a reasonable likelihood of conviction, and that's what justice demands.
So to you, the timetable you felt was better served to get it done quickly, to go that route rather than criminally.
Yes, I did, and I do.
For the public good.
And we actually have sent a letter to we're not going to file criminal charges. I just don't think it's their criminal.
And then she resigned.
Yes. Well, she resigned. Yes.
As this was pending.
So this is yes, and so it's all moot now.
So I suppose the hammer that you had, it was effective in the end.
Well, yeah.
If you believe what you believe,
well,
that she was over the line.
Well, I would say so. I'll let the public make that determination. But you know, she had served 3 years of the Corporation Commission, and you know, apparently no one thought this was an issue before. I do know that there are folks that didn't think we'd move forward on it, but you know, we share the same political party. But I've always said, even when I was running, I've never asked someone, a victim, a witness, what their political affiliation is, what their political philosophy was. To me, the job of being the Attorney General is, what does the law require? We always go back to that. So we always talk to our lawyers about, the paralegals, or just anyone on our team. What does the law say?
We're back with Mark Brnovich, Attorney General. When we come back, we're going to talk about this very interesting issue of fantasy football and gambling on the internet that you've been involved in. We're going to get the Attorney General's take on that. He's very involved in it when we come back on Newsmaker Sunday. Back with Attorney General Mark Brnovich, our guest on Newsmaker Sunday. Good to see you again. This is, what, number 2 on the program? And then you did one before the election.
That is correct.
Right? Tell me about this, this business with fantasy football and the internet gambling on football and the stuff that we find out that some of this fantasy football stuff is not as clean and pure as we were led to believe. There was a lot of inside information that was being used to kind of rig the game.
Yeah, historically, and you know, I used to be the state gaming director and prosecuted gambling crimes when I was at the U.S. Attorney's Office. And what we've always seen historically is that gambling, because it's cash intensive, it attracts crooks, crimes, corruption, cheats. And it's like moths drawn to a flame. And so anytime you get a cash intensive industry like that, you're going to get people that are trying to game the system. In Arizona, we have a general prohibition on gambling, but there are certain exceptions. And anytime you have a third party making money off of it, that's when it becomes illegal. So these daily fantasy sports, fantasy football and stuff, it's illegal in Arizona. And we're seeing that in other states now. Texas recently said it's illegal. New York there's legal challenges going on in New York on it.
But they can bypass you because over the internet you can go anywhere and do this.
Well, actually, we recently, we had sent a letter to the fantasy sports operators, and we had actually asked them what controls do they have in place, what are they doing to make sure that they're doing geolocation, to make sure that people that are putting in information actually aren't from the states of Arizona, for example, in gambling. So we have some assurances, and they've put controls in to make sure that people aren't somehow bypassing and being able to like bounce their server.
Aren't they though doing that?
You know, right now it looks we're not seeing that, at least from Arizona's perspective. We do know that there was some information that came out about that there was some bets that took place in Arizona, but we're still in the process of determining whether that was just someone that had an Arizona license and actually was in, you know, another jurisdiction where it's legal.
Philosophical question. You kind of have a libertarian streak. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Okay. Should we be in the business of telling people what and what not to do? If they want to gamble, let them gamble.
You know, that is a wonderful question. And I think at the end of the day, because of our gaming compacts with the tribes, Arizonans have made a decision. Those were approved by the voters. Lottery was originally approved by the voters by very narrow margins. And so what's happened is Arizonans have made a decision that they want gambling to be limited and well regulated. And that's the position that we've always taken. Now, I would say people's attitudes towards gambling have changed.
No doubt. You're driving from here to California, you're finding casinos every which way.
Well, and you remember when, the casinos were, 20 years ago when they started, the state tried to shut them down and there was all sorts of litigation. When the lottery started, that was controversial. So, people's attitudes have dramatically changed about gambling. And the funny thing about daily fantasy sports, I was recently at a meeting and we were with some of the daily fantasy sports operators, and I was asking them about, well, what are you doing to address problem gambling? What are you doing to make sure that there aren't people money laundering?
How about keeping kids off it?
One of the questions about people that are under 18. And it's funny, their first reaction was, well, let's be clear, this isn't gambling. And so that's their position. So that's part of the debate and the discussion about whether it's really truly gambling or not, which I think it clearly is. So I think people's attitudes have changed, and I think there will be a discussion here in Arizona. I think people are starting to reevaluate this, and sometimes people ask questions about, the scope and the nature of gambling. Now, all that being said, you raised the question of the libertarian argument. I fully appreciate what you're saying. Gambling is a very unuseful economic activity. I mean, it's, there's a lot more productive ways you can spend your money. Quite frankly, I tell folks all the time, my mom's friends from church, that there's a reason why these casinos are really nice and they have nice golf courses. It's not because they're giving away money.
They've extracted.
Yes.
Okay, one more quick one on that, on the libertarian thing, the choice. How do you feel about this push to legalize marijuana for just recreational use in Arizona? One of them is the campaign to regulate marijuana like alcohol.
Yeah, I think we should. I don't want to experiment with our kids, John. I think we should take a wait-and-see approach. There's a lot of talk that something may qualify for the ballot, but
I think it will.
I personally, we've been studying a lot of what's going on in Colorado. We're looking at data like, has there been an increase in emergency room visits? What's going on with
accidents?
So it's something I think we need to really, really seriously consider. We are also seeing data that shows that you're seeing more minors use it. But one of the big problems I have that I think not enough people are talking about is with medical marijuana. We know that you have a majority of the prescriptions are being done by naturopaths. Most of the people, getting the scripts are, 35-year-old and under.
Big back pain.
Yes, males. And so, to me, it's tough because I know my 14-year-old daughter, we teach our kids about drugs, we talk about this, but then when she's driving and she says, wait a minute, I thought you said drugs and marijuana are bad. But it's medicine, isn't it? And so I think actually by calling it medicine, we're actually sending a more confusing message to our kids.
We're going to take a break here on Newsmaker Sunday. When we come back, why our Attorney General supports Marco Rubio, and also we're going to get into this weird story about these body donations that you want to see regulated, some of these outfits that do that. Back in a moment on Newsmaker Sunday. Final moments with Attorney General Mark Brnovich. You got involved in this, companies that do body donations. The one was a biological resource center where they were selling diseased body parts and providing them for uses which donors did not consent to. You got involved in that.
We did. We had a successful prosecution of Mr. Gore. He was convicted of a felony by our office. There are some ongoing cases related to that, even on the federal level. But I will tell you, John, I was shocked. I was shocked of the complete lack of federal or state regulation when it comes to the shipment or transportation of human body parts. And this case literally began when there was 15 severed heads that were leaking bodily fluid, blood, that were found in a Delta cargo plane.
So you said we got to do something.
It's absolutely shocking to me that you can send someone's brain or some bodily fluids, organs across the country without telling the people that ultimately where they go to, the doctors or the military facilities, that they can be transported, the people transported.
So you're worried about disease spread.
You talk about contagious and contaminated.
We've got 30 seconds. I want to get you quickly. You supported, come out publicly, you support Marco Rubio.
Yes, I'm the state chair here in Arizona.
Do you believe that this is a done deal, that Trump is going to be the nominee?
No, I don't. I think that ultimately people know that Marco Rubio is the most consistent, conservative candidate that has our American values, those aspirational values. And when you look at him, you know about his story. It's very similar to my own.
Immigrant story is what you related to.
So I think that eventually that is resonating with people. We're seeing the numbers move. And I think ultimately Americans, whether it's going back to Ronald Reagan, even Barack Obama, people want their president to offer aspirations. They wanted them to be aspirational, not to be attacking somebody else.
Good to see you. Mark Brnovich, Attorney General for
Thanks,
the state
John.
of Arizona, the great state of Arizona. Back next week on Newsmaker Sunday. Thanks for spending some time with us.